That's the beautiful thing about psychedelics, is that as long as I think I'll be alive, I'm not going to be able to buy an LSD mint at a store, because every experience that somebody will have is going to be different. And that kind of defies the act of regulation itself. For me, it was really beautiful to be with women at Tamara who are glowing. And they're glowing because they're not constantly bombarded by these advertisements that are telling them that they need to rejuvenate their face with a cream, or they need to rewind the time with the serum or something.
That's really important, though. I mean, we all need to rejuvenate our face with creams.
What kind of creams? DMT cream.
That probably works. Anyway, sorry, go on.
I'm all into diversity and stuff, and my appreciation for diversity goes beyond the human race. You know, I think I appreciate a diversity of seeds, and a diversity of music, and a diversity of all animate creatures. And I think that by kind of actively making a point of integrating them very simply into our conversations, that's huge.
Greetings, future fossils. Welcome to another episode of the podcast that explores our place in time. Trying to get as epic as possible with that lately, as it seems befitting the content of this episode, with our guest Sophia Rokhlin discussing, among other things, global economy's impending rude awakening, that it floats like a film atop the many times greater volume of all of the things that nature does for us. As author Tony Juniper said with his book, What Has Nature Ever Done for Us? How money really does grow on trees. Our entire economy is just a tiny bubble inside the spinning froth of the circulation of all of matter and energy in nature. The real accounting, flows of things, goes on at a level so vastly transcendent to the things that we are measuring in our human systems. And that enormous deficit, if you want to talk about it in familiar economic language, that enormous deficit between what we're paying attention to and what we have externalized, the golden shadow, if you will, that which we have yet to render visible. Oh, that is a very heavy shadow, my friends. Before we try to stitch that one back on, I want to thank all of the folks who have subscribed and left a 5-star rating for this show on iTunes. You're the best. You're the best. You're doing something that immeasurably helps, really, because I don't have access to the algorithm, but I know it does help this show get into the ears of new listeners who can huddle with us in the Facebook discussion group and or on Patreon in the conversation threads there. And the more I can do to facilitate those conversations, the better. I mean, that's basically what this is all about. It's just encouraging a good gab about the futures we want to live in. Anyway, those of you who have been sharing this show with your friends or talking about it, thank you. Very swiftly approaching my goal on Patreon, at which point I will release an ebook of the insane coloring book I have been working on. My friends, enjoy this awesome conversation with Sophia Rokhlin, master of ecological economics, collaborator on the Environmental Justice Atlas, and many other things. An absolutely wonderful person whom I'm glad to be able to commit to the digital museum and render, possibly one day, a fossil. Could just get rolling. I don't know. Like I always record the lead in, but in introspection, if you ask someone why they're doing something, why they feel that way, it tends to make them more introspective, which tends to exaggerate or like exacerbate depression. Whereas if you ask somebody what they're feeling, then it increases their mindfulness of like the sensations in their body, and it tends to lead out of depression and into curiosity. You know, Spanish has this innate, maybe it's just a happier world, the Spanish world, because they're asking people for what? You know, like what it's like the what is emphasized, and the why doesn't really even, it's not really like a separate question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be wrong.
Yeah. No, it's been really interesting. I'm fascinated by spells, aka language, right?
Oh yeah.
And I just spent 2 years living in Spain, in Barcelona, and I was learning Spanish there. And the way that kind of spells are cast and language is spoken there, they have 5 tenses, 5 time tenses, right? Versus us, which are quite limited, but we have a much more robust adjectival vocabulary. So we use a lot more specific kind of words, but in terms of where we locate ourselves temporally, we're very kind of poor in relation to romantic languages, which I think is very interesting and telling of.
Oh shit! You gotta explain the 2 tenses that we don't use in English, please.
Oh my gosh! Oh, whew. I may have to get back to you on that one. To be perfectly honest with you, like pensaba, I was thinking. Or like iba, I was going to. I can't perfectly translate it for you, but my understanding is that when I've been speaking Spanish with people, it's been much more specific in terms of like I was doing something continually in the past, right? It's not like it happened or it was happening. It was like while it was happening in the past. Yeah, but don't take my word for that one.
I think I have a lot of hypothetical tenses that sort of show up in the structure of my language. You know, like it's just that there are ways that we find around these limitations as English speakers, I think, that are just awkward and cumbersome and awful, but they exist. So, okay. So off to a great start, because you're totally right. English has profoundly and horribly limited my ability to locate myself in time.
Yeah.
And, but to locate ourselves in time, we are recording this the week that the Catalan are articulating a desire to leave.
Yeah.
So as somebody who just got back into the States from your time in Barcelona, like what are your thoughts on Catalonian independence?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, I've kind of tried to remain like intentionally ambivalent about it, because I really wanted to be kind of permeable and open to both conversations. I was there for 2 years, so I kind of saw this like crescendo of the independence conversation occurring. I mean, I think what I've seen is that in the streets, Catalan independence feels ubiquitous. You know, you feel like a lot of Catalan flags are hanging out outside of windows, you know, flown by old people and young anarchists alike, the conservative and the popular. I mean, people from all walks of life in Catalonia do feel a sort of desire to autonomously be represented. And I think a big thing that people aren't talking about is actually what's happening with the taxation structures over there. So to the best of my knowledge, in País Vasco and the north of Spain, which is also sort of internally considered an autonomous region, the people there aren't necessarily, like the way that the taxation structure works is that Rajoy, the prime minister, solicits for taxes, and then País Vasco, you know, they create revenue, and then they provision for their region and then send the rest back to the state, right? And then from there, the state distributes, versus in Catalonia, where there remains this sort of what people in Catalonia that I've spoken with feel it's this sort of economic like slavery, where they're working, they have to send all of their taxes to Spain, which then diffuses it from there. If that makes any sense. So totally. What I heard through the grapevine is that just 2 days before the referendum, October 1st, Rajoy actually proposed, or some of his economic advisors proposed to the Catalan people to go through with this sort of more autonomous economic taxation structure. And the Catalan people said, too little, too late, dude. We're going through with it. So, but it's quite heavy. And I think it's more than anything, it's awful that the EU hasn't formally like addressed this kind of blunt force fascism that you see happening there. You know, it's like, yeah.
Domestic abuse.
Yeah.
Because I bring this up because not only does listening to someone speak a Romance language induce all sorts of like a web work of romantic thoughts around issues that I would not ordinarily consider romantic, like viewing everything within the structural metaphor of two nations coming together or two ecotopes, fusing at the border. But also because the last time that you and I had a conversation in Oregon, it was very much infused with this sense of the agency of the land, and also infusing our notions and our study and practice of economy with some of this really like earthy, grounded, substantial, actual like material reality. And so, in light of there being this like meso macro connection between any kind of power disparity and the way that two parties interact in that space, whether they're humans or political entities, I guess it would be cool to start the actual conversation about your work.
Yeah.
And because I think what you've been studying is so fascinating, and I would just love to hear you talk about that for a little while, and then we can loop it back around and make it all meta.
Yeah, I love meta. Let's meta it. Let's metabolize it. So I guess I just finished a Master's of Science degree in something called Ecological economics, which is in itself an interdisciplinary field, which economy or economics should be. So ecological economics is a field that kind of mixes together energy accounting, geography, history. And within that, and I hope to get into it later, there's this kind of field called political ecology, which I focus on a lot more. But ecological economics is basically looking at the sort of the layer of material funds and flows that actually stimulate the economy that we most commonly speak about in the West. So how much cement, how much gold, how much sand, et cetera, goes into kind of animating this metabolized environment, aka human nature, right? Cities that we live in. So that's what I've been studying. And then within that, I've been studying sort of land rights and the expansion of agro-industry in the Amazon and in Indonesia, specifically with palm oil. So this kind of very curious commodity that's on the rise. It's the #1 most globally traded oilseed crop on Earth. And I mean, I could go on forever about oil palm, but essentially, yeah.
Well, go ahead, because this was how, when I was reading Christian Fagrel's book, The Anthropocene, and it's embarrassing for me to admit that it was only like a couple of years ago that I realized the planet-wide ecological impact that palm oil specifically has, and how so much, because I'd heard about, rainforest being, deforested to make room for, cattle grazing and that kind of stuff. But I had no idea. It just seems so bizarre. There's these huge regions of tropical forest, like so much of the Indian Ocean area, like Oceania and stuff. And then they're just replacing it with palm trees. So to your average suburban American person, it seems like 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, but there's an enormous ecological collapse going on there at the same time. I don't know. I mean, please say more about that so that I can shut my mouth and sound like less of a fool.
No, I mean, listen, I think we're all in a co-learning experience here. And for me, I decided the whole reason, I'll just begin with why I began to study palm oil, or oil palm trees, they're called, is because I was living in the Ecuadorian Amazon with a small tribe called the Sequoia. And I was studying plant medicine over there, actually, hallucinogens and psychotropic kind of secrets out there. And I sort of had this moment of reckoning. I think think a lot of people right now, especially from maybe the New Age culture, Burning Man culture, any sort of these kind of countercultural movements, have become really fascinated in shamanism. And I think that, when you actually start to go to the heart of where these people have traditionally practiced and learned the alchemy of these admixtures and all of this stuff, you realize that it's really quite in danger, like the literal land and the actual place where the work is being done. So I was in Ecuador with the sequoia, and what was most fascinating to me was, driving in or going in through the canoe, I would see that on one side you sort of had this old / current paradigm of Western energy movement, which is petroleum extraction. You had these like fields of petroleum rigs endlessly. And then I saw on the other side these kind of silent green deserts, right? Which are just endless hectares of palm trees. And for me, I didn't really understand what it meant. But the thing about the palm oil tree is that it's actually being used as a biofuel, right? Or as an agrofuel. So it's not only used in food products or in industrial lubricants, although it is prevalent, it's in over 50% of shelved products in North America and Europe in supermarkets. So that's one. And the second part of that is that it's actually being kind of pushed forth by organizations like the World Bank and the UN. And they're kind of saying, if we're going to be moving towards a new energy paradigm, we're going to call it the green energy paradigm. We're going to be using green fuels that are AKA oil palm trees.
Right, because those are trees and therefore sequester carbon. So we look great, right? That's
well, I mean, we can talk about carbon ecosystem services and carbon crediting. I actually have a very strong opinion against it.
Let's put a pin in that and get back to that because I'm very curious. Okay, go on.
So that's how I arrived to understanding that palm oil specifically is a fascinating plant that is kind of its consciousness and its impact is being felt widely around the world and will continue to be felt very widely around the world. And there's something that, I wish that people knew a little bit more about, which is this phenomenon, which is kind of very narrowly discussed in the academic community, but I think it should be frontlined more in major environmental movements. And these are called flex crops. So flexing, like flexibility. And flex crops is a kind of a term that's assigned to these plants that can be used for multiple outputs. So soy, maize, corn, or palm oil or palm, which can be used as a food, a fuel, or a feed. And through advancements in biotechnology, the one input, the soy or the oil palm, can actually start outputting more multiple and diverse outputs, which means that for international investors, they become incredibly lucrative business opportunities and kind of safe bets. Because they're sort of, if you're not investing in one market, you're investing in energy, you're investing in soaps, you're investing in, candy, whatever it is. So this flex crop phenomenon is sort of like the heart or the axis of where I think a lot of monocultures are going to be spreading from here on.
Yeah, so you get to diversify your investment portfolio while keeping it in a single plant, which is
interesting.
It's a weird thought because it seems like if you're doing that, then what you're actually doing is linking those markets even more intimately into the success or failure of this one genetic lineage.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't actually, that just sounds like more like short-term fool nonsense. Because in terms of if you have your feed and your food and they're the same thing, one of them collapses, both of them will collapse. That's not actually a diversification of your portfolio.
Right. Safe but not sound. It's like definitely. Yeah. It's it's a very myopic decision that's being made out there, I think. So, yep.
And yet, if we are going to look at how to turn this around, how to make the value of a virgin rainforest, or even just like, second growth rainforest, which would be like the silver to virgin rainforest gold, then that's like, we've got to make it visible to the economy. And this was what Shvagro was saying in the Anthropocene, which was what you just brought up, which was starting to render the cycles, natural systems, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, in terms of like outboard economic services that are being provided to us by nature. And he's like, I don't like this. He's like, I don't know a better way of going about this. It's like, I don't know how we can make the like emotionally dead, ostensibly value neutral economic machine learn to care about this stuff unless we put it in economic terms. But he's like, but that's still about us. That still carries over this modern axiom that humans and nature are separate, and that these are that this is stuff that's like basically like we have to allow it to be quantified and regulated in this way in order to allow it to remain wild, which is the primary mind fuck of the Anthropocene. It's like we have to actively conserve this thing in order for it to remain untouched. Therefore, it doesn't really work. And so carbon credits, like or like anything, I guess I'm curious if your critique is anything like a sweeping critique that would include delegating a cryptocurrency to the Congolese people for rainforest stewardship so that they can participate in the global market without decimating their natural resources in order to do so. Or what are the like, I actually went to school for this shit, thoughts on this stuff.
I didn't go to school for studying cryptocurrencies, but I have been studying a little bit. And before I get into the actual thing, I think a lot of the time people are kind of talking about this idea of delegating a cryptocurrency to provide some sort of an ecosystem service for whatever, when in reality that could also exist within the economy that we have going already, or in another structure, right? So I think a lot of the time people get a little bit gung-ho about the potential of blockchain technology without really understanding that, some of the fundamental functions, why, it's an accounting database, right? It's not. So that's one thing. I mean, I think a lot of the time too, people talk about can we put this on land management? Let's manage our land with blockchain. I'm like, dude, you could do this with an Excel spreadsheet, right? So just without overcomplicating things. I mean, for me, I've been, the whole world around, and I would like to get back to the land rights, but I think the whole world around blockchain, I think, first of all, it's incredibly difficult and often inaccessible language for people to understand. And also it's a field that's developing so sort of exponentially that even trying to keep up with the learning curve as somebody who's not kind of an expert in fintech and financial technology is always going to be talking like they don't really know, and I think that, I would be interested in sort of heralding a paradigm where we talk more openly about what we don't know about blockchain rather than what we do, whoa, I'm going to do this ICO, I'm going to do this and that. And I think that a lot of the time we're not really understanding it in a systems view.
Very true. Totally on a tangent. Ecosystem services.
Yeah. Ecosystem services, man. So basically, this whole idea of commodifying isolated elements in an ecosystem started in the 1980s. And this term we called PES, Payments for Ecosystem Services, was basically a scientific, economic, environmental initiative to kind of create value in a value-based initiatives or incentives to fuel conservation, right? But I kind of it's not necessarily the most pragmatic, but I think it's more of a long-term perspective. It's a more philosophical perspective where if you are putting a price on valuing, the hemlock tree versus the eucalyptus tree or something. You're not understanding that a hemlock tree exists because it is fueled by, like mushrooms and other trees. And I mean, you're completely abstracting it from its entire ecosystem. So a friend of mine, Brett Scott, who writes a lot on, financial hacking and environmental issues on this matter, he said something like, you have if you're trying to pay for an ecosystem service, it's like trying to put a price for your heart, right? Like, are you willing to sell it? If you're trying to isolate this one sort of thing, like, how far does that really go in the long term? Yeah, you can put a price on it, but does it really make that much sense? So yeah, I think it's quite problematic that we're doing it.
What's the alternative?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, the alternative would be kind of a hybrid, like doing it, but frontlining the understandings of the implications of what you're doing, if that makes sense. So like frontlining the issues in this conversation. But honestly, I don't have an implication, but an alternative. But I think just because I don't have an alternative doesn't mean that you should just go forth with whatever you have, right?
Let's put it on the blockchain. And let's pretend like we know what we're doing. Yeah. Like just like not allow dissent.
Yeah. And also understanding like who do these systems work for, right? Like when you're throwing something on a blockchain, like is it going to be like the Indian mango farmer who's actually running it? Or when you're talking about commodifying the river, like whose river is it? You know what I'm saying? And it's still kind of fitting, it's kind of still sifting us into this Western hegemonic sort of environmental management paradigm that we're working with.
Oh shit! Management.
You can't unhear that one.
No, it's in there forever. Well, and it's like William Irwin Thompson. I don't know if you're familiar with his stuff. I probably chewed your ear off about him the last time we spoke, but he is a planetary thinker. He's somebody that worked with a lot of mystical planetary thinkers in his 40 years as the head of this post-academic intellectual concert for the realization of planetary culture or something to that effect, the Lindisfarne Association. And there were people in this group like Lynn Margulis and Stuart Brand, James Lovelock, and all these folks who are thinking about the next era of human society as an ecological era. Very specifically, a maturation of the immature or premature global mindset of the 20th century, where after World War II, we realized that the fallout from the bomb gets up into the atmosphere and drifts across the ocean, and that you can't win a war anymore, that like the weapons are too big, the consequences are too vast, everything's too interconnected now. And so we entered, he talks about this in his book Evil in World Order, 1972. He's like, basically what we have in this age that's emerging is two different responses to the understanding that we live on this planet. One of them is the mystical response, which is just that we're participating in this enormous organism that we can't fully understand. This sounds a lot like what you're sort of suggesting, that well, we can put this forward, but we can put it forward provisionally. We can accept that ultimately it's a mysterious phenomenon, that it remains open, that our understanding of it is constantly evolving. The other side of it is the technocratic management paradigm. And he really specifically says, technocratic elitism versus the mystics is what's going to be the 21st century. Like that's where we are with this. It's like it used to be the industrialist versus the artist. But then the industrial world ate art, and now there's paintings inside the bank, and your band succeeds by getting into a car commercial, and
Yeah, and my question for you is, where does cyber shamanism fit in there, right? Like, is there some sort of a, I mean, right, like that's, I mean, for me, that's what I see as the sort of the vesica, right? Like the intersecting point between what seems to be these two irreconcilable worlds of like mysticism and sort of essentialized romantic, somatic sort of encountering, interacting with your environment versus this, management technocratic thing. And so, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting that we're talking about the Vesica Pisces in between the irreconcilable opposites, because today, as I'm sure you know, Mars conjoins Venus under a full moon. So you have that yin-yang, baby. The sun and the moon, the masculine and the feminine are here. It's a great time to take a look around and observe our environments and see where we find this reconciliation going on in our own souls. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know the answer. I think that it seems to me like, and this is what I find so fascinating about your passion for this stuff, is that it is a very high level, like orbital view, economic, vast systems way of relating to something that is ultimately very much about our bodies, the very like root of our existence, our sustenance, our heart, our relationship with the land. And then on the other end of it, it seems like as we technologize nature, we naturalize technology. So like, I think that the fruit of contemplating the Anthropocene and contemplating what, an ecology and economics looks like as a single, it's like astronomy and astrology. It's like that really should be one field. Economics and ecology should be one thing, kind of, right?
Well, of course, yeah.
So like the degree program name is just sort of weird. The fact that we still have to talk about these things as two things. Right. I think ultimately, hopefully having to use the word techno-shamanism or cyber shamanism just like disappears into redundancy or irrelevance. That like Richard Doyle talks about there being, like you're saying about how do we quantify a particular tree. Is like, if we try to extract the active psychedelic chemical from some, from mimosa bark, then we have to do so by surrounding our scientist with an ecosystem of laboratory equipment. And it's just a dumb ecosystem compared to the smart ecosystem that within which the plant natively incarnates or whatever. It's like. So we're back where we started, except we're in an artificial environment or an environment where we're participating more actively. What are your thoughts?
I mean, that's an interesting thought. I agree with you. But then if you start to like push to like the contours of this idea, like you're extracting an active compound in the mimosa bark in this sort of what you call like artificial or unnatural environment. I think that that's even a concept that we have to kind of overlook, and understanding this dichotomy between human and nature is where we started getting a lot of our problems to begin with, And I really like this idea of something called social metabolism, which is this idea that humans, if we do kind of think that we are natural, I personally think that I'm of this planet. This is my star here, like
if not 100% organic, possibly GMO, but definitely
I'm a little soon to be Borg, but no, I think like if we're understanding this idea that humans metabolize our environment, right? So I'm in this room and around me is a wall made with paint which is metabolized X, Y, and Z, and even though we do kind of live in this infinitely abstracted relationship with these primary elements, we still are these like great wizards and these great alchemists that are creating these urban environments that we live in. But I really like the example of like, opening the tap in a water a water tap in the city, and then just seeing the water flow, right? And then following it back, like through the tubes, down into the reservoir, back into the river, and up the mountain, right? And even integrating that systems view, I feel like is incredibly healthy and sensible and rational and palatable to the most kind of technocratic genius that you're going to be finding in the office, right? And I think that even then, kind of that very conscious meditation of demetabolizing our environment will help us understand the impact of how much we metabolize and when we metabolize and why we metabolize. And yeah.
It reminds me of Big Mind. If you're so Genpo Roshi, who is an American Zen master living in Salt Lake City, came up with this real interesting dude. He's the lineage holder for the oldest Zen lineage in the U.S., the White Plum lineage, but he's also this like Jewish motorcycle jacket wearing kind of like cool dude. It's strange, but also totally in keeping with Zen's love for personal idiosyncrasy. And he takes it and he drills it down and backwards into regarding the self as a multitude. So he's done this thing with Zen and voice dialogue therapy where he carries an audience through a conversation with different aspects of like different subroutines of their own mind, like modules, So, inside Sophia, there is the critic, the skeptic, the defender, the vulnerable child, like all of these voices that are there as strategies for, in one way or another, negotiating that self-other boundary, right? But once you get through, a little bit of familiarity, like once you get yourself comfortable with the practice of switching from this perspective to another perspective and asking each one for its input, because every one of them has some ecological function within the greater self, and taking them all as sort of perfect in their own right and complete in their own right, even the damaged self and like these parts that are, almost like Christ-like in their eternal perfect woundedness, right? Then you realize that none of them are shouting for your attention. And suddenly you notice that there are these other subtler voices around, which include, like, he has to speak to Big Mind and Big Heart. Like, those are the big ones. And Big Mind, the question that I've gone through this process with a facilitator a few times, and the process always gets to this question of like, how big are you? Like, you're sitting there appreciating your original mind, It's like it contains everything. Or does it? Ask your own big mind. And you're like, how big are you? And everybody invariably laughs because you're feeling out to the edge of it and you don't find the edge, right? Like like, this is phenomenologically true. I just want to like make it clear this isn't like an intellectual abstraction or just an exercise for people. Like, if you really feel to the end of your awareness, it's really just the end of your ability to pay attention to it, And I hear that in what you're saying about like demetabolizing all of this stuff that you've sort of like plastered. Literally, we've plastered ourselves away from all this stuff. And we're like, oh, no. Those walls are full of rats. Those rats are exhaling and I'm inhaling their exhalations.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, totally. And I think, oh God, I could talk endlessly about the exploring the contours of the self, and I think that there are many different. I mean, I think there are many different disciplines and vocabularies that you could do it with. But one that I'm really interested in, and I would love to hear your perspective on, is talking about scale. Right? Like, it's inevitable that, like, okay, at this point in time, I have this ego, and I'm relatively familiar with how I operate in the world. Like, I can have a DMT-induced experience and start to kind of transcend my boundaries of self. But in my day-to-day life, and in most of the day-to-day life that I'm with, the people that I'm with, we have our own localized consciousness and our own localized awareness. And from there, then I start to think about, like, how much autonomy and agency do you have over your environment around you, right? Like, what can you do around you? And then I think specifically with regards to activism and what I've been working with in this project called the Environmental Justice Atlas, we're kind of frontlining these ideas of scale, right? So understanding, like, when you're understanding global ecological crises unfolding in all sorts of corners of the world, but mostly on what we call these commodity frontiers, which are based in the so-called global south, right? These really resource-rich areas. Where do you locate yourself in this battle? Or not in this battle, in this unfolding human saga. Like, where am I? I'm in New York, but my, garbage is here, and my, the toothpaste that I spit into the sink this morning is there. Like, it's all. I'm everywhere, right? And where do you put yourself? Where do you stand with this? I think that the Atlas is a little bit more like orthodox in this respect. It's not necessarily talking about scaling and environmentalism, but the Atlas is a database of all reported environmental justice conflicts happening around the world. ejatlas.org, environmentaljusticeatlas.org. And what the team is doing there is we're writing basically all of these cases of people who feel that, in the throes of capitalist extractivism or in dumping, they're receiving an unequal burden, and they're not receiving a proportionate benefit to these projects. So for me, then I focus on my commodity of the moment is palm oil, but there are also issues around nuclear waste, even like flower cutting, you know what I mean? The flower industry. There are all of these little facets that we're not, really focusing on. So yeah, in terms of scaling and locating oneself, I think that that's a really interesting project to check out the Atlas and then see where you resonate, where you locate, where, you feel water, I dig, or firewood, I dig, or whatever it is. And then just kind of creating a kinship and a deep recognition and rapport with that one natural element and its story. So
this reminds me of Dieta. And this notion of just taking a week to acquaint yourself with rose or to acquaint yourself with holy basil or whatever the thing. You said you did some work in that space with the sequoia, and I'm curious in what way that connection has made itself manifest in the way that you're thinking about these issues, and because you're clearly on sort of an intellectual dieta with palm oil. Dieta, I guess it's accented.
Dieta.
Dieta, yeah.
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 Well, I'm going back. I'm just kind of transitioning out of this palm oil, and I'm actually helping my friend Daniel Pinchbeck write a book on ayahuasca.
Oh, right? That guy. Yeah.
That guy. Yeah,
I know that guy.
That guy. That amazing psychonaut. Yeah. So right now we're doing preliminary research, and we both come from a lot of personal experience using the ayahuasca medicine or yahe. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm bringing right now is, I'm kind of doing a 360 right now. I started with this sort of interest in altered states of consciousness from a young age when I was 14, 15 years old. I was an actor when I was a kid, and I was always interested in transcendence, right?
Oh yeah.
And then
that was my first experience of transcendence was in acting class.
Yeah, of course. Totally. There's that threshold between between the performance and it's incredible.
Blacking out and waking up 5 minutes later and everyone's clapping and you're like, what happened?
Or not.
Yeah, or just staring at you like someone died. Yeah.
Yeah, but the blacking out is is what we're in it for.
There's blood everywhere.
Yeah. So, but anyway, altered states of consciousness, my favorite conversation, and probably yours too. What I'm learning from it is that, so I came to the jungle, and first I came to the jungle via this kind of neo-shamanic urban initiation. The first time I drank ayahuasca was in a cold squat in Long Island City. in 2010 or something. And then somehow I made it to the jungle over there. And then it was at that moment there that I realized I'm never going to be a shaman. Or maybe I'll be a shaman, but is that the best thing to do for the world right now? And then I start to realize when you actually meet the elders and when you see the land, you realize that these people have a rapport with their environment that I never will have. And I don't need to have, because I have my own New York City and that's my environment and I love it too. But what can I offer? What services can I offer? And that's where I transitioned from kind of studying religion and anthropology and plant medicine, ethnopharmacology, all of those things, into kind of hunkering down and saying, shit, I'm going to study land rights. I'm going to study economics. I'm going to study these things that I've traditionally kind of veered away from because I felt, we're too like masculine and mainstream or whatever. But I realized that those are the tools that I have at my disposal, and that's where I can make the most movement. And now coming back to this ayahuasca project today, I'm really interested in frontlining conversations about like the political economy of psychedelics and actually where do we source our hallucinogens from, or any of our kind of, any of our we need to start to, that's the thing. I feel like there's this huge kind of cognitive dissonance happening between people who are, taking these psychedelics, but it's happening in a vacuum. And if we're really going to deeply do the work, we have to go to the source. And if we really appreciate that work, we have to start defending those jungles and those people, and I feel like, where's that conversation?
We need the Starbucks of tripping to popularize the fair trade 5-MeO DMT, sourced from captive bred toads.
Yeah,
it's like, let's, I sort of joke, but I also when I was at the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors last fall, I met this guy, Yakov Travis, who's actually writing a novel about someone who gets through to Starbucks, and the goddess, the typhonic Starbucks goddess that has a
two-tailed mermaid. Yeah.
Yes, she's been neutered, basically, or neutralized sexually in the evolution of the Starbucks logo. You don't see her cleft or anything anymore. And in this novel, someone gets through to Starbucks and Starbucks begins distributing some sort of mind-altering tonic or potion or something. If we could just get their distribution chain to take up this cause. You look at folks like David Bronner, for example. Mm-hmm. I just love that he's Cosmic Engagement Officer of this company, that he didn't just inherit the wealth, but he's like, all right, how can I do responsible things with this? And the question in our age is with your decision to move into the study of these, at least in recent tradition, these sort of masculine discussions, there is also a sort of a feminine wile that can be executed by recognizing the role of these multinational corporations as the platform for change. It's so clearly the fulcrum has shifted. The weight is in business so much more than it is in politics. Business is dragging politics. And so how do we even get this conversation happening when we're not even allowed to regulate or certify? You have certified organic. But you can't have certified. You can have certified organic bud now in some states. Mm-hmm. But you can't really do that with, I don't know, let's say just cocaine. Let's imagine in a world where these charges, these polarities have truly been negotiated, and you can get cruelty-free, totally, you say what you will about the medical benefits of it or whatever, mm-hmm. but let's imagine a world with cruelty-free, fair trade cocaine. What's it going to take for us to get from here to there?
Yeah. And that's a great question. And that totally circles then back to this idea of what is the price of commodifying and kind of regulating substances and these things that we're interacting with. But something I heard once that I love is this idea, especially with the cannabis trade being increasingly sort of formalized, right? I heard this guy say, capitalism will not transform cannabis. Cannabis will transform capitalism.
Let's hope.
Right? I mean, that's the best we can do. And I feel the same about ayahuasca, and I feel the same about, any of these hallucinogenic, plant medicines that are really beginning to become quite prevalent in our interest right now. And I think that it is going to increase, and that's inevitable, right? I'm personally against the hard-lined formalization of it, because I think that what happens in this is we remove all of the risk from the experience, right? Which is what kind of commodification is in and of itself. It's like you're taking what you want, right? And then you're removing what you don't want.
Christmas tree farms are freaky to look at.
Say more.
They're freaky. I mean, it's rose. We had lots of this stuff actually in Florida. Growing up in Florida, there's lots of plantations, of various trees, and you just see. I didn't get it as a kid. I was like, what's wrong with that forest? Like, you just see like row after row, and there's no presence under them. Yeah. And I'm kind of being facetious, but the fact of it is that there's a reason celebrity Texan Willie Nelson thinks that regulating cannabis is a bad idea. Like, actively says, let's decriminalize this, but let's not try to like template some new matrix of nonsense on top of it, because you'll lose all sorts of things with that. I mean, totally. Just to talk about cannabis, like, it can go well relatively, like it did in Colorado, or it can go relatively badly, like it did in Washington. And very few people talk about what a disaster the Washington legalization process has been for independent farmers and for people that were not big money coming in from out of state to like prey upon this. Again, it's like you said, it's extractive. Yeah. Oh, here's a place that we can grow weed. Excellent.
Conference. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I don't know. I tend to have a soft spot for these kind of clandestine economies, any of these sort of the hackers and the pirates and the shamans. I think that it's yin yang, and if we try to put everything on the one accounting book, like, this is a monoculture. That's another monoculture, right? You're creating an economic monoculture by increasingly commodifying everything you possibly can. And I think that's something specifically interesting that's unique to ayahuasca and psychedelics in general, and not cannabis, is that psychedelics they kind of defy commodification in that you can have unpredictable and very harrowing effects. And that's the beautiful thing about psychedelics, is that as long as I think I'll be alive, I'm not going to be able to buy an LSD mint at a store, because every experience that somebody will have is going to be different. And that kind of defies the act of regulation itself. So I think that in this strange frontier of attempting to and entertaining the idea of commodifying psychedelics, we're really going to learn a lot about the actual nature of commodification itself, right? Like what are the limits? Can we actually go that far? And I think more interesting stories are on its way.
What about, so is this a Sophia thing, or is this I lived in Barcelona for 2 years thing? Because I mean, everything I hear about the continental mentality is that there's a lot more of a bumper zone between what's on the books and what's not on the books. Like podcaster Chris Ryan talks about, he's living 20 years in Barcelona, and how it'll say no parking, and there'll be like 20 motorcycles next to the no parking sign. Yeah. And he'll find a cop, and he asks the cop, and the cop's like, well, technically it's illegal, but we're not going to write you a ticket unless we have some reason to write you a ticket. It's like, just, they're not out to like wrap your knuckles with the ruler unless they really have a reason to do that. And it seems like that's something that I experienced at the festival where we met, at Boom Festival, where it's like, they really, when they had the panel interview with all the festival producers, and the guy asked about the undercover cops at the festival, and he's like, look, man, like, we're working with them. We're not going to lie to you. We're not going to keep them out of we're not going to try and screen everyone and like keep them out and like give them a hard time, but they have no reason to give you a hard time. Yeah. Like, wherever you're from, like, what are you worried about? You're in a place where people are just looking out for each other and trying to make sure everyone's having fun in a safe way. And
yeah. I mean, and I think it's also interesting that there was this level of transparency at Boom. I work at Kosmicare at Boom, so it's the psychedelic. Yeah. So it's for those of you who don't know, Kosmicare, and also similar to like Zendo initiatives, it's this kind of psychedelic harm reduction project, which provides a safe space for people who are going through kind of difficult drug-induced experiences to have space to go through that. And instead of rather like suppressing it or just getting over it, actually giving that moment integrity and traveling through it, right? And considering that an initiation of itself. So yes, we're in this like big pop-up initiation camp with a lot of people who, you know, go through this thing, but it's really beautiful. Yeah, I think I mean, that's an example to me where like the formalization or the integration into the spotlight, right? Because Kosmicare is kind of run by the Catholic University of Porto. So in conjunction with, I think it's a little spore from that. So that's an example where it's really beautiful. Yeah.
So, I mean, is that, you talk about the yin yang of like the pirates, like you've got the empire and you've got the pirate utopia. Yeah. You know, and is that
I don't know what the utopia, but
well, I mean, I'm like Hakeem Bey talks about the temporary autonomous zone. You know, the pirate utopia. Like, it doesn't last. Yeah. It's like you've got your booty from the last raid, and like maybe you can coast on that for a couple of years.
Yeah. You know? Oh, we're almost about to talk about anarchism.
Can we go there? Yeah, the political, the ontological anarchism, because I think that's sort of at the heart of this, right?
Yeah.
Is that all of the stuff that you're saying is like, well, how much can we commodify it? How much can we superimpose this paradigm onto the wilderness that is the reality of our situation?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I identify very strongly since living in Catalonia as an anarchist. And people kind of, especially in the US, I think people's hair, you know, it's like petting them backwards or something. It's kind of uncomfortable to hear because it's very, right, because it like lacks a very clear definition for a lot of people. Like for Occupy, people were saying, oh, like they didn't get it done, like they didn't finish the project, what is their goal? You know what I mean? And I think from my understanding of anarchism is that it's inherently a process and it's inherently autonomous. It's inherently dynamic and fluid and happening. And so when I talk about pirate economies or hackers or any, you know, or shamans or any of these guys, they're actually, you know, anarchists in their own right, in the sense that, yeah, they're not attempting to sort of become the usurpers of mainstream economic paradigm, but they create breathing room for difference, which is the most important thing I think that we need when we're in a world that's increasingly becoming the frontiers of monocultures of the mind, monocultures of crops, monocultures of economic systems, you know? So I think that these guys are actually the unsung heroes of our world right now. Yeah, so.
I had this revelation. I was at the Eclipse Festival. It was right after the eclipse. And my friends and I went to the Sun Temple. It was right next to the First Nations camp, and they had this huge circle of people that were dancing, I guess clockwise, you know. And then inside the circle was this other guy dancing counterclockwise. And my buddy pointed and he was like, "That's the Heyoka. That's the trickster of this tribe. I guarantee you." He's like, they always go against the grain. They're always petting people backwards, you know, on purpose, because if your fur is all going in the same direction, that's a monoculture, right?
Yeah. So,
and I thought it was like a little sketchy too, because he was taking a video of everyone in the circle, and I was like, if I were a little more paranoid, I'd be like, that guy's a CIA agent. Like he's like standing out there.
Paranoid.
He's got the perfect pose for this. Like he's the trickster, so he can kind of do whatever he wants and get away with it. That's the, you know, you look at the larger culture, that's the accusation. A lot of people like Tim Leary, like, oh, the best place to hide is right there in public. But anyway, setting that completely aside, the point is that I wrote down this in my notebook on that day, that to like watching him go in that circle, to complete things is to uncomplete them. To complete things is to uncomplete things.
Them,
because that circle needs that guy going in the opposite direction. It's like the tooth of the gear that allows it to rotate in the first place. And that if it's all swirling in one direction, like water doesn't work that way. Like if you just have a sphere full of water and you twist it, then that water will twist against itself and create a counter rotation. It just happens. So I don't know.
It's beautiful. I love that. To complete things is to uncomplete things. Yeah. And also I think this, like the Heyoka is also like the original supervisor, right? The Heyoka lives on the mountain, like on the side of the tribe, looking over things. And with the petting of the animal, like the kind of the unidirectional fur. This one's going to stay with me. I'm going to be petting a tiger in my sleep tonight. Like you also understanding that this unity is often sort of encouraged to create efficiency. And and we put such a premium on efficiency in our culture. So when this Heyoka does start going counterclockwise in the back, he's making things inefficient. And that's really beautiful medicine right now, I think. I mean, in healthy doses, I guess, in the right place. Don't take my word for it. But do you know what I'm saying?
I totally do. And actually, you created a space for which I would like to ask, as much as I have like questions for you about harm reduction and whether there can even be counterculture in a planetary setup, because it's all one ecosystem, right? So it's like things can define themselves in opposition to other things, but ultimately that's anabolic steroids, catabolic steroids operating within a metabolic system that is all of a piece. But since you're talking about petting a tiger and creating inefficiency and intentionally encouraging waste and mess and confusion as part of the recombinant solution to the complications of complexity, right? It's like sex emerges.
I told you it was going to get meta.
Right. Sex emerges out of the confluence of ecological conditions whereby multiplication generates more solutions than addition. You're going to get more new types of creature faster if you allow them to exchange the DNA horizontally than you are if you're just waiting for mutations to happen in these siloed verticals, to use an economics term.
Very
right?
nice.
So, that's why people look for vertical integration in economics, and that's why people look for horizontal integration in the bedroom. So the question is, while we're talking about the influence of European philosophy and culture on your political, economic, and ecological views, I am super fucking curious to know more about your time at Tamara.
Oh, yeah.
Because, okay, so episode 17 with Tibet Sprague, who I know you know. Yeah, I met you two around the same time at Boom, and I think both of you were staying at Tamara at the time. Yep. And I know Daniel Pinchbeck's been out to Tamara, and I tried and couldn't make it because I couldn't speak Portuguese well enough to the taxi guy. But they have this whole philosophy about love without fear. And I've been thinking a lot lately about, like, even the term polyamory annoys the shit out of me for a number of reasons. We don't even need to go there. But, like, this idea of allowing love and intimacy to be messy, open, process-based, undefined, right? We get to this point, and I've been, like, really feeling it today specifically because of the astrological environment, right?
Yes,
that there's like this moment, it's like it's an apotheosis, it's a zenith, it's a completion, but it's also just one more fucking day, right? And then Mars and Venus and the sun and the moon, they like, move out of their perfect alignments. They probably already did, and And then we're all like hanging out in our cosmic post-coital
cosmic ripple,
blues, was it good for you? Oh, like I wasn't asking that question 5 minutes ago. I hadn't retreated into language verse 5 minutes ago. So I guess I'm just saying, like, you've been there on site and like witnessed firsthand a human community that allows for this mess, not just in their relationship with their biotope, not just in the way that they relate to the land, but in the way they relate to one another as human beings. And I am super curious about what inspiration that's been for you, or what effect that's had on you. And
oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, there's so many lessons that come out of having visited Tamara for me, and I hope to go back one of these days. But yeah, I mean, I think I think something that's the most kind of jarring thing that happens for somebody like myself, who's been conditioned to have these sort of deterministic relationships and definitions and all that stuff, as that you can hold space for this chaos, but you need community to do so. So if you try to translate these kind of open relationship or love without fear relationships in a city, I find that they don't work as well, or they, because you don't have the same kind of context to support the variables, the waves of eros that come over you, right? So I guess the idea is basically, like, for example, if I'm at Tamara and I fancy someone, or I'm at Tamara and I have an issue with them, I have an elder, or I have a friend with whom I can say, hey, like, can you talk to this person for me? Or, hey, can you check in with that person? And we can have all of these people working as intermediaries. And we have these kind of like synapses and networks of people that are communicating messages throughout a network, a complete system, which is what allows for this kind of this openness of relationships that happens. And when you try to translate that into an ecosystem like New York City or San Francisco or anything like that, it gets a little dicey. So community is,
So wait, you actually like pass a note through the elder, sort of like that?
You sure could.
Like, I fancy so-and-so.
Yeah.
And then they're like, don't fancy them.
I have bad news bears.
There's a trash compactor.
Yeah, you're like, man, this is a human. No, I mean, we've love for all sorts of animals over there. But remind me to talk about the birds in a second. But I mean, at Tamara, there's like kind of like an eating space, a lounging space, a dancing space, and there's a table there. And then on certain evenings, there'll be somebody who's standing there and offering like a messenger service. So kind of somebody that's offering to say, like, hey, if you don't want to have this conversation yet, or you would like to kind of relay this feeling in a different way, I'm here to help you. Or that person offers themselves as just a mediator. So you could have person A and person B, and then mediator kind of holding space for that conversation to take place, which is so amazing. That
is the cosmic opposite of Tinder.
Yeah.
It is like the precise negative image of how we're using technology to disintermediate at the same time that we intermediate, right? Like, we've taken that person in the middle out because it's more convenient, supposedly, but it's actually like, you can only shuffle the mess around.
I mean, I almost agree with you, but it's also in the sense that robots are programmed, right? These technologies are programmed. So how you're being mediated is actually your mediation between swiping left and right, or my interaction with you, or whatever it may be, is actually written. It's coded by the literati of the technosphere. Right. So it's not a totally apolitical thing that's happening.
Definitely not, but it's like the way that we've sterilized so many other parts of our existence. We've tried to make the process of potential partner review this like efficient, reliable, easily commodified thing. And in doing that, we've actually just repressed the uncomfortable shadow of the messiness of this connection, so that it ends up on the back end instead of up front in a conversation where you're like talking with a mediator. It ends up being this thing where, like, you know, you have a lot of, potentially anyway, awkward dates with people that go nowhere, because you're basing it, you know, you've like valved it down to just what you can know about a person that fits on the screen and like you can react to in a second, you know? So yeah, like the mess never goes away. It's just redistributed, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And in, like,
totally.
Actually kind of shitty ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I also think that, like, for example, there's such like the whole allure of these things is that you're taking love you're taking your romance into your own hands, quite literally, right? But maybe that's not what partnership is about, you know? I mean, for me, I kind of love the unsolicited advice that I get from my friends and my family about who they think I might be good with, right? And that's how I think partnership has classically worked for a very long time. And then when you start to use these technologies that say, oh, it's all up to you, you may be looking for what you think you want, but it may not be necessarily like perceiving yourself as holistically as others might. You know, that's not to like advocate for arranged marriages per se, but yeah, so that's what's so beautiful about, I mean, next episode, but so anyway, so I mean, being in Tamara, for example, people have eyes out for you, you know, they're like, you guys might have a connection, and not in any sort of forceful way. And I think the most beautiful thing about Tamara is that it's a very safe environment that all of this is happening. You have female elders that are kind of running what I felt to be kind of running the show, holding a lot of space for these conversations to happen, which to me made it feel that it wasn't just sort of like hypersexualized, accelerated, romantic kind of summer camp or something like that, which it could be, but it's not at all. And a lot of the time you're actually going there with, like, you know, a lot of wounds and you're working through really heavy stuff, you know, but the fact that you have everybody there watching out for you is what makes it such a transformational experience being there.
Just that thing about wounds. I think that was like that actually, I felt that going over to Boom and like just being on the beach with all of these people that, like, by and large, the vibe was didn't grow up with any kind of sexual trauma, possibly wasn't even born in a hospital, you know where my food comes from.
Yeah.
And I was like,
my butt sees the sun all the time.
Yeah. No tan line. Yeah. And I was like, and like in these mica flecked, glittering golden waters. And I was just like, you know, it's like the people that with the near-death experience and they die and then they come back and they're like, oh God, waking up in that hospital was the hardest thing I ever did. Like, you know, coming back through U.S. Customs where I had to declare my Portuguese honey.
Oh.
And then like go through the whole agricultural inspection process of them looking at my honey was like waking up in that hospital, you know, after my near-death experience with my like tan line-less potential European self. But yeah, so this thing about do it yourself though, like to touch on that, and maybe this connects to birds. I don't know.
Oh yeah, baby.
Yeah, it definitely connects to birds. This is a huge theme in this podcast, is the role of the elder, you know, and like becoming elders, like rebooting elderness, you know, rebooting the community or the economy of the value, you know, the perceived cultural value of the elder, after we've, you know, basically created a dust bowl of senile dementia and elder care facilities, and, you know, the worship of youth. And so like recognizing that we have to do this. At the same time, we've been brought up with exactly what you just said, which is the emphasis on, I don't want my mom to have any say in this. Like, I don't want my, and yet what that looks like is you're saying, throw away all of your old country, you know, non-English speaking grandma's awesome folkloric health advice, and get your hypochondriac ass on WebMD and figure this shit out yourself. You know, and I don't think that's advisable. And therefore, birds.
Therefore, birds.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm leaving that one in your lap too.
Can I tie them together?
Can you cross this bridge?
I mean, here we're gonna do this. I want to talk about elders at Tamara, because this was also something huge for me, and specifically elders, and also reconciling like feminine elders, right? Like feminine voices of authority in society, or not authority, but like of, what's the word? We don't even have the language for it anymore. I don't know, guidance or charisma. Yeah. Like people, people who we take seriously, whose wisdom is appreciated and, taken, it's weighty. It has gravitas, right? For me, it was really beautiful to be with women at Tamara who are glowing. And they're glowing because they're not constantly bombarded by these advertisements that are telling them that they need to rejuvenate their face with a cream, or they need to rewind the time with the serum or something.
That's really important, though. I mean, we all need to rejuvenate our face with creams.
What kind of creams? DMT cream.
That probably works. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, write that down. So an elder woman at Tamara was telling me about communication with birds and communication with animals. And this kind of neatly ties into our conversation with casting spells and language, and the English language specifically, and how in our we don't use gender pronouns for like animals or objects, right? So in French you would say, or in Spanish you'd say the sun, el sol, is masculine, or la mesa, the table, is feminine. So everything around you is given, it's kind of like anthropomorphized by the gender value, or the gender kind of identity that we give it, right? And what happens is that in the English language, we kind of refer to animals as it, right? So the dog is it. If I don't know it personally, and when you call something an it, there's a process of othering that happens. So if you and I are sitting here and a very handsome golden retriever kind of rolls up, I'll say, oh, look at it. It's so cute. Michael, what do you think of it? And I'm not saying, hey, golden retriever, how are you? You are so handsome, right? Like we completely we don't have any room in our language to have a participatory conversation with animals and trees and plants, all sorts of creatures around with us. So what I noticed personally was in the process of communicating with animals, I had like a little dove sitting above me. I just said, hey girl, like, what's up? You look hot. Or it happened with a horse. I had this amazing experience with a horse by just looking her in the eyes and saying, listen, I've never talked to your kind before, and I may be a little bad at this, maybe a little awkward, but I want to have a conversation. And I'll tell you what happened, man. The horse she put her big head against my torso and started nuzzling me. And then all of the horses around the ranch came, and they came to the edges of their fences, and they wanted to see what was going down because we were having a real conversation. That's like life hack 101 from an elder woman at Tamara. Yo.
So do you do that with birds then?
Yeah.
Is that the through line?
That's the through line. That's the fish hook. Yeah.
Hey,
with
mister.
everybody. Hey, you. No, but and I feel like, because otherwise life gets really lonely, if we're only hanging out with humans all the time. I mean, no offense, but I'm all into diversity and stuff. And my appreciation for diversity goes beyond the human race. I think I appreciate a diversity of seeds, and a diversity of music, and a diversity of all animate creatures. And I think that by kind of actively making a point of integrating them very simply into our conversations, that's huge.
Yeah, it reminds me of the observation in some stand-up, I forget, that we have been, we replace the actual oak runs and forest glens and all these things with neighborhoods called Oak Run, and on the street is Forest Glen. And then I talk about this shit all the time, but like the scale between the actual Amazon rainforest is like tipping over to Amazon.com, you know, as like the library of genetic information. We can actually witness the weight or of the impact in the world of our ethereal human knowledge as it's like starting to outcompete the
poor apples,
the noosphere eating the biosphere, kind of, right? You know, as like, or you know, in the same way that eukaryotic life sort of took over on that macro scale, or the way that life took over from the lithosphere. I don't know. Anyway, last year I was visiting a friend in Santa Barbara, and I was out on my friend's lawn playing guitar, and this silver thrush came out and was digging the harmonics of this particular thing. Like, I noticed specifically that the bird was like attracted to a particular style of playing. Mm-hmm. And I saw this bird every day. I was out there. And you always come up and be like, oh, it's you playing guitar. And then I was in Albuquerque later that summer, just outside Albuquerque in the desert, and I saw one. And I saw one right as I had stopped to talk to my friend who was camping out there, and he was playing guitar. And I was like, and he said that. He's like, oh yeah, the silver thrush, they really love harmonics, specifically like guitar harmonics. Huh. I was like, oh, interesting. So now I can, like, you know, and then I brought this up with this guy who had picked me up from the airport and was driving me to Moogfest when I was going to give my talk on techno-shamanism. And he was talking about how he would actually he turned out to be this extraordinary pianist. And, you know, just like, you know how it is, like he's just the driver, you know, whatever. And he's like probably in the top 5% most talented musicians. That's like not in this whole event. He's not even playing it. And, he was talking about how he would set his keyboard up on the back patio of his house right up against the woods and just like get into this jazz freestyle thing with like all the birds. And his wife would come out and be like, oh, you're jamming with the all the birds again. You know, and we lose that, like coming back from Australia, where I couldn't even count the number of different kinds of bird song I would hear waking up in outside Byron Bay. I come back here and I left my window open last night, and it's like three kinds of birds. You know? Yeah. And even then, do we know their songs? Yeah. Unfamiliar. Do we know their songs? There was a new one. I've lived here for 3 years, and there was a new bird song I didn't recognize. And I was like, son of a bitch.
Who's this guy?
Who are you?
Show me your passport.
Yeah, where are you? Because the cat, and that's the fucking clinch on it, is that the cat, our neighbors' feral cats that they feed, chased all the birds out of our yard. You know? And that's like, you got to have this conversation with the neighbors. Hey, you. Hey, first, you know, second person, subjective other. And then also with their cats, like, I acknowledge your right to exist, but you got to stop breeding in my yard. I don't know. Yeah, that's a very funny conversation that happens in conservation. You have like a deer. You have two deer in a territory, and one is indigenous and one came in via settlers like 40 years ago or something like that. And then this new deer is starting to kill the indigenous deer, right? So everyone is saying like, oh my God, like the first deer is indigenous and it's his home. Like we have to do something. But you're like, dude, like the other deer, the cat, right? It's like, what is he supposed to do? What is his thing? So then you have all these forest rangers trying to go in, and we call them the cult of wilderness, right? And they're trying to like preserve this pristine idea of like innate and essentialized kind of nature. All these like frontiers of like what, you know, who gets to say what. So Ayana Young, who was talking at the Eclipse Festival, and I just recorded a conversation with her because she's a conservation ecologist and runs this cool group, Restoration Ecology. Actually, it's, I guess, more accurate, forthewild.world, and has a For the Wild podcast. And
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's a great podcast.
Yeah. So
I listen to it all the time. Yeah.
She was, quote unquote, just on the show. And I asked her this question. I said, what is your thought on, what are we trying to conserve? Because somebody asked me that after my talk at the eclipse, was like, so what does it mean to be a conservationist? Because again, like, with this, your relationship philosophy where you involve the community and you like actually listen to people's advice about who is and is not maybe a good idea, that actually in a way is more traditionalist or conservative than the like 150-year-old American idea of what marriage is. That we're calling traditional, and we're calling it's a conservation of marriage in that sense. And so it's like, well, the world that we've been living in for the last 12,000 years is pretty weird compared to like most of the history of Earth. Ice caps, that's weird. Not normal for Earth to have ice caps. So her answer was, and I thought that this was really sane and integrative and, not just retrogressive, but also forward thinking, was that it's basically ultimately about biodiversity. And that it's not about trying to like retouch a photograph of, the Appalachian Mountains circa 1852.
Yes.
It's about how can we make this ecosystem thrive, even if it means introducing new species, like the way that there's some people that are trying to reintroduce elephants to North America because they think that like this entire ecosystem, the prairie system, was set up for like mastodons and mammoths, and they're gone, so like what we found when the Europeans got over here wasn't even wilderness anymore. It was this weird disturbed ecosystem that was like in the process of becoming something new. And they're like, if we really want to like make America great again, we're gonna need some fucking mammoths, right? And if we can't have mammoths, if we can't de-extinct the mammoth fast enough, we can at least like prepare things with some African elephants, even though African elephants have never lived in North America. So that I felt was really, that seems to strike the balance where we're looking at like what is not like what's it going to take to rebuild the original engine of this runaway truck that we're all in, but like what's it going to take to like jury rig some sort of new engine from like the parts from 5 different cars.
I see.
And like the point is to have a working thing.
Is it? Well, yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
I like.
Do you have an alternative?
I just pulled a little Hayoka there. Yeah. Well,
you completed things by uncompleting them.
Awesome.
Thanks, Sophia.
Thank you, Michael. It was awesome.
Yeah. This conversation, intermediate as it is by the invisible code of invisible programmers will never meet, definitely less vital than having this conversation with you face to face. So maybe next time we can actually link up in person and set some things on fire.
Totally. We could do a co-bark. We could have like a barking orchestra of thought sometime next time we meet.
No latency. So you mentioned the ejatlas.org, Environmental Justice Atlas. Where else can people find you and find your stuff?
Yeah, right now on Twitter, at Sophia Rokhlin, Rokhlin. That's my handle. And I'm building a website. I'm just getting out of the kind of hermetic academic sphere. So I'm just working on the publication thing. But follow me on Twitter and you'll see what's happening.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Any leftover sentiment you want to offer the unborn listeners of this show?
Rainbow seeds for justice of all kinds.
That will date the show, I'm sure. Thank you.
All right.
Hey, I really hope you liked that episode as much as I did. Oh man, I love doing this show. It is super fun, but it also takes a lot of time and energy. So if you care to show your support, please take a stop on by at patreon.com/Michael Garfield and consider leaving your credit card information and DNA, and I can get to work on my clone army. I appreciate it, people. Truly and authentically. One human being in this meta-industrial planetary machine lattice to another. We gotta look out for each other, because we are, after all, just pseudopods of the same hyperdimensional process of becoming. I see you, baby. Distal end of infinity. Listening to itself. Yeah, that's good. Till next week.